Hello, my name is Kernahan Webb. I am a professor in the Law and Business Department at Toronto Metropolitan University. And more importantly, for today's purposes, I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. For those of you who are patching in for the first time to one of our in-conversation sessions, welcome. And for those of you who are making a return engagement, welcome back. Today, we're going to be discussing the Australian government's response to the Bondi Beach tragedy, a legal analysis, and we'll be in conversation with Professor Benedict Sheehy of the University of Canberra Law School. And I just wanted to mention that these sorts of sessions that we have fairly regularly are done in the spirit of constructive engagement, particularly looking at what sort of combination of government action through laws or otherwise, private sector action through their industry standards and so on, or civil society action through a variety of different ways, um, uh, can optimally respond to a particular social, environmental, or economic issue, as the case might be. Next slide, please. The Toronto Metropolitan University is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Just to mention as well, the Toronto Metropolitan University was formerly known as Ryerson University, so apologies for anyone confused by that name change. All Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which comes from the ISO 26000 social responsibility standard, which is a guidance standard developed by ISO. ISO is a international non-governmental body. So, for example, it's not part of the United Nations, and it is a body that brings together public sector, private sector, and civil society organizations and individuals from around the world to develop standards, so voluntary instruments, not laws, that are intended to enhance the ability for organizations and individuals to operate across borders. As you can see from the definition of social responsibility, which I might add is the standard was developed by more than 300 different organizations and individuals from around the world through a transparent and consensus-based approach. And there were both developed country and developing country participants. A real attempt was made to have a balance from all sectors and from both the global south and the global north, as the case might be. The actual standard is more than 100 pages long, but a critical component of it was this definition of social responsibility, which, as you can see here, is about the impacts of an organization's decisions and activities on society and on the environment through transparent and ethical behavior, contributing to sustainable development. Sustainable development being development that meets the needs of current generations without compromising the needs of future generations, contributing as well to health and welfare of society, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders. Just to note that stakeholders is a very broad term encompassing, yes, certainly shareholders, but also citizens, communities, non-government organizations, businesses, governments, and so on. So it is stakeholders is a very encompassing term, and is in compliance with applicable law and consistent with international norms of behavior, and is integrated throughout the organization as well as practiced in its relationships. So with respect to that latter point, it means that the organization itself attempts to ensure that the way in which it operates internally is all addressing these sorts of points, but also in its relationships, for example, with communities, with citizens, with consumers, with workers, with governments, and so on. So it's both inside the organization and also outside of the organization, as the case might be. Next slide, please. The second animating concept for all of the TMU CSR Institute sessions is the concept of sustainable governance, which, as you can see here, basically starts from the proposition that in the 21st century, where we have very, very complex and challenging environmental, social, and economic issues that don't neatly stay in one jurisdiction. They tend to bleed from one jurisdiction to another. They tend to be fast evolving, oftentimes with sort of a technological angle to them. So given the nature of the problems that we face in the 21st century, the idea behind sustainable governance is that all three of government, the private sector, and civil society have unique capabilities to address the sorts of problems that we face in the 21st century. And they each have got the capability to do that through rule instruments, processes, institutions, and actors. I'll say more about what those are in a second. Sometimes operating collaboratively, and sometimes operating more in more of a check and balance or rivalrous manner. In other words, it's not always about holding hands and dancing around the maypole, although collaboration oftentimes is a very powerful approach. Sometimes there's actually competition between one initiative and another, or even between between the government and the private sector or civil society. And arguably, that sort of challenge capability between actors, instruments, institutions, and processes is a positive thing, because it tends to lead to innovation, and it tends to increase the likelihood that we have the best combination of approaches in place at any particular time. Next slide, please. Just unpacking a little bit more how the terms institutions, rule instruments, processes, and actors is defined for purposes of sustainable governance. Institutions refers to those entities in society that carry out public interest-oriented functions. So that could be rulemaking. In the case of government, that would probably mostly consist of legislation and regulations. But if we were talking about industry, we might be talking about an industry association's code that all members must sign on to. That's an example of the entity that creates those rules for industry would be a institution for industry. And by the same token, with respect to civil society, an environmental organization could have a body within it that creates the rules, and another body in it that is involved in the implementation of them. And the same is true with respect to private sector and government. So you could have a government agency that's involved in enforcement, and that would be a separate institution, and another agency that's involved in adjudication, for example, courts. And there could be different ones for dispute resolution and adjudication and so on when we're talking about the private sector and civil society. Those are all institutions because they're all carrying out public interest-oriented functions. Then there's rule instruments. So rule instruments can certainly include law and regulation, and oftentimes do. And clearly, governments as institutions, and legislatures and laws are critically important rule instruments, but it also could include, as I mentioned earlier, an industry association set of rules that all members of the industry association must meet, or for that matter, a civil society organization like ISO that creates standards that are not legislation, they're voluntary, but they can be adopted, widely adopted. And then processes. So there's processes of rulemaking, such as lawmaking for government, or standards making for non-governmental organizations. Rule applications, so that would be inspections and enforcement for government, but it would be things like conformity assessment, certification, auditing, that sort of thing for non-state entities. And same thing with respect to rule implementation, where it would be a regulatory agency on the government side, but it would be, for example, a wing of the industry association that's involved in monitoring compliance with a industry rule and that sort of thing. And then finally, there are actors, and actors encompasses both individuals, for example, individuals within government, bureaucrats and so on, or judges, and individuals within corporations and individuals within civil society organizations like an environmental organization. But it also includes the broader entity itself. That's also an actor. So for example, Greenpeace is an actor at the same time as the individuals within Greenpeace are actors. And the same thing is true with respect to government, where you could have the Legislative Assembly is a actor at the same time as the individual elected representatives are actors. So they're all actors and they're all interacting, and it's the interaction among them which, when you take all of these concepts and put it together, leads to the distinctive approach to addressing a particular issue. And certainly that would be relevant to our discussion here today, where all three of government, the private sector, and civil society have got unique capabilities of addressing a situation such as anti-Semitism and what can be done to prevent that. And then when it does happen, what can be done by each of government, the private sector, and civil society to respond to it once it does happen. Next slide, please. Just to let you know that we are constantly holding these sorts of sessions on a wide variety of different topics to determine what the next ones are. There's two possibilities. One is that you can check the CSR Institute website. So just Google TMU CSR Institute, and that will take you to the website and you will see upcoming events. And also you can get on the mailing list, at which point you'll get a prompt from the CSR Institute regarding upcoming events and that sort of thing. We have an ongoing project concerning the current turmoil that's happening at the global level in terms of the rule of law and the international rules-based order. And so that's going on. There'll be more sessions on that coming up. And there's also, as you can see here, there's a place where you can go on the CSR Institute website to get more information concerning that ongoing work. And as you can see from the rest of this slide, there's a number of other things that we are doing here that may be of interest to you. I'm not going to go through each of them here now. Next slide, please. So our guest speaker for today is Professor Benedict Sheehy, who is a professor at the University of Canberra Law School in Australia, holding a PhD degree from Australian National University and a PhD Juris Doctor from the University of Windsor, also holding master's degrees from University of Queensland and McMaster University. So both sort of Canadian and Australian degrees here. And he also has a bachelor's degree from Eastern PBC. He is an internationally recognized leader in the fields of corporate social responsibility, corporate law, and regulatory theory. He's published extensively in leading legal and other journals. And his work, the one thing you can say about it, even though he covers off a wide variety of different topics, one thing you can say is that kind of a distinctive feature is its interdisciplinary nature, that it typically involves people from a variety of different disciplines, and hence as well, it involves typically publishing in more than just law journals. Next slide, please. So about this session specifically, I think everybody knows that there was this horrific anti-Semitic attack on peaceful grouping of individuals in Australia, and the two gunmen attacked them during a Hanukkah celebration at a park adjacent to Bondi Beach. That's why it's referred to as the Bondi Beach tragedy in Sydney, Australia. It led to a killing of 15 people and injuring of dozens more. And in the aftermath, serious questions being raised about the adequacy of the Australian government's legal and regulatory response to the risks of mass casualty violence in general in open public spaces, and this particular type of mass casualty violence, namely an anti-Semitic attack. This 1 hour session examines how Australia's firearms laws, policing powers, emergency management frameworks, and public safety regulations operated before, during, and after the incident, and whether they were fit for the purpose in preventing, containing, and responding to the attack. So you can see there the sorts of themes that we're going to be addressing: fragmented legal authority, interagency coordination, information sharing and escalation pathways, and just basically how to maintain an appropriate balance between civil liberties and public protection on challenging issues like that. So we'll also be talking about possible reforms beyond the direct analysis of the currently existing approaches, if time allows. Next slide, please. Just a final mention that this session is being held at a particular time in Canada, but there are people patching in from around the world, and self-evidently, we're all in different time zones. So props to you for everybody patching in at the different time that you're in. If you do have a question or comment during the session, please email me, and I'll do my best to fold that into the session. So again, we're very thankful to have Professor Benedict Sheehy from the University of Canberra Law School here today to shed a little bit of light concerning the Australian government response, a legal analysis thereof, to the Bondi Beach tragic shooting. Over to you, Ben, and welcome. Welcome back, actually, because it is a return engagement, although it was quite a while ago. So, but welcome back.
Thanks, Carnahan. It's a pleasure to be with you and CSR Institute at Toronto Metropolitan, and great to see you again. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you about this tragedy and about the government response. As you discussed, there was the attack on 14th of December in Bondi. We call it Bondi, which is a suburb that has a very famous beach. And the attack, in a sense, is just sort of, one of the many types of emergencies that police and emergency responders generally have to deal with. And I think to a certain extent, it caught people off guard. So Australia had a massacre like that in 1996 in Tasmania, called the Port Arthur Massacre. And in that massacre, someone had I believe, had broken out of a prison and massacred many people with a gun. And there was a big government response, which essentially was a buyback of all kinds of weapons. 650,000 firearms were surrendered, a national firearms agreement, a gun buyback scheme. And that's really put Australia into a situation, a much safer situation, and I think more of a situation that's analogous to the Canadian landscape where gun violence isn't the norm. So uh, that's sort of the baseline. So when something like this Bondi attack happens, it's not unprecedented, but it's 30 years ago, and the emergency response is not really set up for something like that. The emergencies in Australia tend to be around bushfires and flooding, and so kind of with that in mind, if you think about how we organize our emergency response, what we're looking for is really saving lives. And that's where our investment is. The way that's done is done on a state by state basis through something we call an SEAS, uh, State Emergency Services. And that's an interesting um, an interesting body in its own right. And we can talk about that more if you like later on. Um,
Actually, Ben, maybe just as just a point of clarification, the Port Arthur incident, somewhat similar to the Bondi beach incident. Was there a sort of a significant hate element or kind of a terrorist, what we would now call a terrorist element to that one? Or was it really just kind of a man who escaped from prison who was just going on a indiscriminate shooting spree?
Yeah, it was the latter. It wasn't at all hate induced. So in analogizing the two, I'm just looking at the physical facts and
Right.
the
Right.
legal context rather than the social context.
Okay. Okay. All right. But in Australia, in terms of the legal apparatus that is in place in Australia, one thing that's distinctive is it sounds to me as if the sort of the criminal response is a state-based as opposed to a federal approach. Is that correct? That's just a difference, for example, between Canada and Australia, if that is the case. But I might have misunderstood your point there.
Australia's got interesting criminal laws. The um, It reminds me of a little YouTube clip recently where somebody was make said they'd filled out the immigration form and come into the Sydney airport, and the immigration officer asked him, "Do you have a criminal record?" And the person said, "No, I didn't know it's still required." But
That's a very historical reference, if I've ever heard one.
it is, it is. So although it's interesting, we look at Australian history. Although Australia was settled by convicts in the 18th century. Um, the convicts pretty quickly got on the right side of the law as they set up their own institutions here. And leading up to where we are today after Federation in 1901, where we have, um, in Canada, you've got Upper and Lower Canada, and then, the different colonies put together. In Australia, we had um, colonies as well, each with their own criminal law. And on Federation, they didn't give up their criminal law. Instead, they added another layer of federal criminal law.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Right?
So does that mean that there is at the national level, there is a kind of an overarching set of criminal offenses, and then that's supplemented by, and they just operate concurrently, or how does that work?
No, we have the best of all worlds, where we have criminal jurisdiction of the federal government and each state having um, its own
Unique.
law. Correct.
Okay. So can you give me an example of how that would work in practice?
Um, So, for example, criminal law is not my area of expertise, so I've just got to pull something out of my hat
Sure.
here,
Sure.
which may be incorrect. But if you were to look, for example, on something like a securities fraud would be a federal
Okay.
matter,
Right.
and that would then be dealt with by the AFP, the Australian Federal Police. I suppose the analogy there would be the RCMP.
Right, right. Okay.
Then you have the constabulary of the various states. And so we don't end up trying to think. I don't think we have metropolitan police forces. We may have in no, we don't. So we don't. I get you would have a Toronto police force. We don't have a Melbourne or Sydney police force. We have
Okay.
Vic police and New South Wales police.
But so the things like murder and assault and theft and so on, those would all be established by uh, state legislation, which I would imagine over time it's pretty similar from one state, Tasmania, to another or whatever, right? Like there, or
Yeah.
are there some drastic differences? Not really.
No, no.
No. Okay.
You're not gonna drag a victim from Victoria to New South Wales before you do the deed.
Okay, and I don't want either of us to go down the rabbit hole of criminal law here, but rather this is just to kind of contextualize before we kind of move into things like the gun restrictions and that sort of thing. So, would the gun restrictions then be a federal thing? Yes. Okay, those are
Yeah.
at the federal level. Okay, all right.
So that's a
And is there any particular hate law in Australia? Like
yes.
distinctive? Yes, there is. And again, is that federal or is that state?
That's federal.
Okay.
So what you've got is you've got fairly independent states here. Probably a little more analogous to the US, though, thank
Yeah.
God, not quite to that level of independence. But the so with the firearms register and firearms regulation following on the Port Arthur massacre, that was all federal. And the what was great about that is then all the states signed on.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that was a bipartisan um, change to the law. What we had with respect to racial vilification laws, that I think follows on 1986 um, piece of federal legislation, which was dealing really putting an end to the white Australia policy.
Okay.
So, Australia's got, a dreadful history in that way, in that it didn't have any acknowledgement of Aboriginal people who were here. And as a result, there aren't treaties as there are in Canada or
Right.
the US. Not that those treaties were particularly fair or great instruments, but there's at least some acknowledgement. So the Aboriginal people here have had to, they, they were not full-fledged citizens until 1967, I believe. So, I mean, it's just like pretty appalling stuff. But
Well, we know
Australia,
it doesn't matter where you're looking. I think there's an incredible amount of that history that now many countries, Canada, Australia, among them, are wrestling with sort of reconciliation and trying to correct that. And I know there's many distinctive aspects, probably another rabbit hole there that you could go down, which we will set aside. But suffice it to say that there is a kind of a anti-hate, anti-racial sort of discrimination type of laws in place starting, you were saying, in the 1980s, more
yeah,
or less?
1975 is the
1975. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
Racial Discrimination Act.
Okay. Okay. And
Right?
did it criminalize any particular behavior, or did it just say that this constitutes discrimination?
It constitutes discrimination in the 1975 Act. The criminalization is um, I think it was last year in 2020.
Okay. Okay. Much more recent. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But preceding the Bondi Beach incident or not?
Um, I believe it was, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah,
All
there
right.
was a criminalization there.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I bumped you completely off your story in order to
Oh, it's
kind of
all
just
fun.
get get a little of the, as they call, kind of backfilling. But I think the
Sure.
backfilling is over for the moment. Please
No.
proceed.
All right. Look, these are one of the wonderful parts of these conversations with you, Carnahan. So
Yeah,
this this is the good stuff.
yeah,
So um so with that background, Australia wasn't isn't it was not set up to deal with terrorist acts of this type. And I guess I need to put a caveat on that straight away is we're not sure this is terrorism
right,
in
right,
right in the sense that this is violent acts in order to change policy settings or choices in a government.
right.
So that's yeah,
Is the word terror used in the legislation, or does it just keep it at hate?
hate.
No, it's not used. Okay, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but is there now talk about having a anti-terror provision specifically in there? I'm completely in agreement with you that the issue of characterizing any particular event as hate is in its own right a complicated issue, and terrorists would be again another level of characterization. But just is this in the air, or is the conversation not sort of bringing up that particular aspect? I mean, it seems on its face to be an anti-Semitic act, but whether or not there's a legal characterization to that, it seems to be directed at a particular set of people because of their religious beliefs and that sort of thing. But I don't know whether or not the law, as it's being applied in Australia, is sort of uh, characterizing it in that way, or not, or even whether it's being kind of wrestled with.
No, there's law enforcement's been extremely careful, and I think rightly so, in not characterizing it as terrorism. It's been described as a hate act, and I think that's correct. And I think that with respect to the criminal aspect of that, moving into terrorism, I don't believe that we have connected hate and terrorism. Frankly, I don't think it's necessary
Mhm.
because look, I have to, do hats off to the Australian government. When push comes to shove, they get stuff done. So
Yeah,
we've already had legislative reform in response to that. So what we're like 6 weeks later, we already have a legislative response. So
that is incredibly prompt.
yeah, yeah. So that to me that's great. That's good. That's a big win.
Yeah,
And I don't think the reason I don't think is necessarily connected to terrorism because uh, uh, you know whether hate crimes move into terrorism is neither here nor there. I think that most hate crimes um, they may terrorize a specific population, but they don't, and like in this case, terrorizing Jews. But that's not a population-wide effort, which I think what terrorism usually is an attack on the government as opposed to an attack on a specific population.
well, I don't know about that. I think what we can agree on is that the word terror is it's a social construction, and it's a potentially contested term as to exactly what it does mean. But I'm just thinking, when you do have, for example, a foreign organization that is influencing the acts of people within a particular country to do acts which are against the public peace and order of that country, that could potentially be characterized in a different way than just a pure hate crime because of that element that I've just mentioned. There's a foreign element that is influencing a local element to do something, so those sorts of additional elements I can see could be added and could be uh, the the uh, the focus of a particular offense or a law. I'm not saying they have to. I'm not saying they would be better than just having an anti-hate sort of crime, and that encompasses everything, and then that's actually preferable approach. I make no comment one way or the other on that. I'm just kind of just raising it to hear whether or not that kind of distinction, where there is a foreign element that is attempting to influence and destroy or upset the order, the peace of a society, whether or not that element was sort of brought up as a part of the discussion, and whether or not there's sort of recognition now that that's something that we could do, and that it would do something that just having an anti-hate law might not do. And I'm just at the level of, I'm not saying we should, I'm not saying we should in Canada, in the United States, in Australia. I'm just wanting to hear whether or not it's being considered, just at that level.
Um, I want to agree with tell you where you and I agree that where you've got any kind of foreign interference, then you've got an interference with government, and that certainly is, uh, I think would fit the legal category of terrorism. Um, whether or not it overlaps with hate crime to me is a separate question.
Mm,
Um, the there are questions in some of the local press about whether or not this was ISIS motivated,
mhm.
um, an ISIS motivated attack. How the government is responding to that, I have not seen. I don't know.
Okay.
Um,
Fair
there,
enough. I just raise it so that it's something that we can both, put a tick box beside. We at least kind of identified that's a possible element, and what you're saying is you're not aware of any particular sort of effort by the Australian government to characterize it that way, and or to explore whether or not some sort of a offense distinctive and specifically focusing on that hasn't hasn't reached your kind of emails yet as a or Google as an issue that's being explored. That's fine. We can certainly move on from that point. I don't mean to sort of delay you on that, but just rather we've mentioned it and we can go on now.
yeah, well, I actually think it's quite important because the government's response, in addition to the legislation, has been to strike a royal commission. And the legislative change deals with religious issues, and
Okay. So the
and
parameters, the parameters of that commission includes consideration of the religious angle, and you're not aware of whether or not it also includes a terrorist angle.
I don't know if it includes a terrorist angle.
Okay,
The
fair
hate
enough.
speech, the hate speech revisions specifically target religious leaders,
Right.
the reforms.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there is certainly something there because a state actor like ISIS um, is religiously motivated. And I want to just put something out here quickly that the issue isn't religion per se; it's a matter of extremism, and that whether it's Catholicism or Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism, they all have violent extremists, and it's a question of the 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 investment of other actors behind those extremists. And look, whether they're violent at the start or not, it's a separate issue. But just, extremism, whether it's extremism in politics or religion, any ideology, undermines social cohesion and the ability of a society to function.
Right.
So the hate speech reforms, as I said, what they do is they increase the penalties for people who engage in hate crime if those speakers are religious or spiritual authorities. So
Okay.
it targets that quite carefully, and and really a recognition that the problem is extremism rather than any particular religious set of views. With respect to the Royal Commission, it's got a very broad ambit that would allow it to include terrorism where the actors are, pawns or proxies for other states. So I expect that that will be quite wide ranging. It includes the terms of reference include dealing with ACO, Australia's spy agency, as well as the federal police. But if you're dealing with the spy agency, you'll
Yep.
be considering state and non-state, foreign state and non-state actors. So I think that it's got a pretty broad ambit, and we'll see whether or not there are those foreign actors there, and whether or not there are foreign actors or there look to be foreign actors involved.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so we were talking about some time ago. We were talking about specifically the gun control laws, and I think I bumped you off that. So I don't know whether you wanted to finish your thoughts specifically on the gun control laws or moving
Yeah,
on to another point. Yeah.
yeah. So I think the gun control laws are important. And excuse me, that reform after 1996 really, kind of tamped things down. Um, there's been that toxic American influence of the National Rifle Association, NRA, and
Hmm.
extremist right wing. As I said, extremists of any stripe are toxic for a society, for
Right.
social cohesion. So they've been coming in through our right wing, the extreme end of our right wing government or political parties, and we have a couple political parties committed to that. We have One Nation, which is sort of a bizarre, the far right group that seems to be gaining a bit of traction as the traditional right wing sort of collapses in on itself, where they had a moderate side and a radical side. Um, and so that kind of super pro-gun uh, ideology has come in through them. And the result has been that over, the past decade or so, there's been sort of an increase in guns entering Australia, coming into Australia. Um, so that's a gradual shift in society, but I expect there's already a move to do something again, like we did in response to the 1996 Port Arthur shootings. So,
Is it just at a factual level, has there been at least kind of like a preliminary um, uh, statement that the guns used in this particular situation were illegally obtained and show a weakness or a limitation in the gun control laws? Or has anybody been kind of drawing that connecting the dots in that way?
I don't believe they were illegal guns. I believe they were registered, but I'm not sure on that.
Okay.
There, the we also had the thing is we've also had another very unfortunate shooting out in rural Victoria recently, which has drawn more attention to the gun issue and the gun problem. And I think the proposal is to limit it to 3 firearms. And personally, I have none. I don't see a need for them. I
Right.
recognize, if you're out in the country and you're, dealing with feral rabbits or
Sure.
um, feral animals or something like that, there's a need to have a gun, of course. I don't think it's American style necessary to go to the 7-Eleven to pick up milk with an AK-47 over your shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not about it to take your milk away.
Right.
So,
Right. and a carrying in public license as well. So you can go into a Starbucks with your AK-47 slung over your shoulder. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Just getting a
right.
cup of coffee. Nothing to get alarmed about. No
That's
reason to
right.
get jittery from the caffeine here.
That's right. I like sprinkles on my cappuccino. And if I don't get it, I've got the
Yeah.
gun.
Sorry. Yes. Carry on.
Yeah. So the so what we're dealing with then is, we're not prepared for this type of an emergency. And what you've got then is a question of coordination between the New South Wales Police, the state police with the Australian Federal Police, and whether or not that would have been or should have been coordinated differently than it has been is, I think, an open question. The New South Wales Police would have had jurisdiction, would have been the responders to that. I think that the one of the issues with that response is really government decisions about not funding public services. So
Mhm.
not a lot of New South Wales police on the ground in the first place. So when there's something coming up, they're not readily available. Not able to get to the scene as quickly as they might have in a very dangerous situation like this to come with the equipment that's necessary. That would have taken a bit of time, I'm sure, to rally that up. These
Typically with these sorts of events, there will be a kind of um, an uneducated but nevertheless highly sort of uh, in strong currency sort of explanation for what happened and why it happened, and therefore what needs to be done about it. If we had just done X, then this wouldn't have happened. And is that sort of in the air that the issue was this? If there had just been more police, this could have easily been resolved. Or what's the kind of the line, or potentially conflicting lines, there could easily be, or overlapping lines that are kind of in the air at this moment as to how this could have been avoided or prevented or what have you. What's the what's in the air today?
I'm not great on that, but I love your preamble there. For every complex problem, there's a clear, simple answer that's wrong.
Yeah, yeah, that's often how it's reduced to that, however problematic that sort of response is. But nevertheless, they're often in
Yeah,
the air, and there's often a sort of a germ of truth in it.
there is a germ of truth.
Yeah, yeah,
So my diagnosis with respect to investment in government services is not one of those.
right.
The the quicker responses are there's um, uh, there's kind of three responses. One, that it's a problem of Islamic migrants. Two, it's everybody hates the Jews. And three, there's too many guns. And it might be kind of worthwhile kind of looking at each of those. Um, and I mean, when we think about it, the base thing is, oh, these people, the shooters were, Middle Eastern and Middle Eastern, and the assumption is that they are Muslims. They were Muslims, and they seem to have been extremists, so Islamists. So then, oh well, the problem is Muslims and Middle Eastern people. The problem with that one, of course, is that the Bondi hero was himself a Middle Eastern Muslim. So I don't think that's a problem. I just think that's absolutely fantastic because it undermines the credibility of that whole stupid narrative. So,
Right.
I mean, like that's in an absolute tragedy. To the extent there's a stroke of luck, it's that.
Sure.
Um, so, that uh, I just hate to think of what would be happening if that hadn't been the case, you know. So, I mean, that's fabulous, and you, you can't say enough about that guy's bravery as an individual and decency as a human. So that's sort of kneecapping or making that narrative hard for those who'd like to get traction, racists basically, who would like to give that traction. The second question, or second story as well, it's, all about the Jews. Um, that if only they had been listening and looking out for the Jews. I think there's some credibility to that. There's been a rise in anti-Judaism. I think that's a better word. I realize I'm at odds with the International Holocaust Association on that, but I think as a person with a background in ancient history and a bit more focused in that region of the world, there's a difference between Semitism and Judaism. The Semitic peoples are all of the people in that region. The Jews are a specific group, ethnic group within that. So the question of anti-Judaism, that's been on the rise around the world. And I think that comes, of course, out of medieval Western European thought, really, where it's connected to the Catholic Church primarily, and different state policies that were implemented in that era that have sort of, seeped into Western culture and been formed part of Western thinking since that time. And I think that sort of connected up with views by the contemporary Muslim community or certain Muslim thinkers with respect to the state of Israel. And so there is that discussion of, well, if we had just been busy protecting the Jews, things would have been fine. The last bit on guns, we've talked about, and, as you were saying, Carnan, if only the police had been there, if only we had police on every
Street
corner,
corner. Yeah.
right?
Well,
You know,
but I mean, they're something that you do see in some jurisdictions is uh, active tracking. For example, they'll have someone who actually is working for the government, but they will be going to uh, events happening here or there in order to track, seeming hate-oriented organizations. And clearly, someone was asleep at the switch because how could they not know about this thing happen? Which I'm not saying that is the case, but I'm saying that is in some jurisdictions, they actively, part of the governmental proactive preventive approach is this infiltration of groups who could potentially be engaging in hate-oriented activity. And so therefore, they would have an opportunity to prevent this sort of thing from happening in the first place. And again, I'm not saying that that should have been the case in Australia or that was the case in Australia because I'm on the outside looking in. I'm really just trying to get a flavor for what sort of things are being are in the air now as the commission begins its work. Is there a kind of a widespread belief among some that if X, Y, and Z had been in place, which wouldn't have been singling out any particular group, either as a target of or as an instigator of, but rather if there were particular laws in place that were designed to try to anticipate and diffuse those things from happening in the first place, then we wouldn't have been in this situation. Everybody's always in a hindsight 2020 committee sort of situation after these happen. And that's understood. I mean, everybody understands that. But I'm just in this particular context, with this particular way in which the issue arose and was addressed, has there been any talk of that or not? And it could be there just hasn't, and that's fine. You're factually kind of just reporting. I'm not asking you to take a position on this one way or the other.
Yeah, no, look, there's uh there's not uh, a particular legal thing here. The shooters were on the police radar, and the police have uh, pretty significant powers in Australia, unlike Canada, and they're not constrained by rights that we have
The
in Canada,
charter. Yeah. Yeah.
in the Charter. So we don't have that here. These shooters were on the police radar, having been in the Philippines for training in December. Was it December or sorry, maybe October last year?
All right.
And they were posing with ISIS flags and that type of thing, and the police were aware of that. So that would have been AFP, the federal police. So they were certainly on the radar, and we've had situations like this where people have been on the radar and the police have not acted, and events like this have occurred. Not certainly not to this scale. So I think there are questions there about policing of radicals, and
Right.
so, but I don't think it's at this point, it's a general discussion. No.
It's interesting. We've all heard that expression, what is the sound of a dog not barking? And we don't know, you don't know, and I don't know how many instances like this have been prevented because there's been early action, quiet early action that has essentially disassembled or otherwise deactivated a potentially dangerous situation. And we'll never know about that. It could be, you do hear about this, for example, in the United States, is that, there's an attempt to assassinate the president or whatever. They get one of these every 10 days, but they don't say anything about those because they were able to address them quietly. So I'm
A
anticipating that,
non-event.
yeah, yeah, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a very active, government capability that's addressing the issue. It just means we don't hear about it, and perhaps there's a reason why we don't hear about it. The idea is to just quietly address it so that there isn't kind of widespread panic in the streets and that sort of thing. But so I guess until there is maybe until the commission comes out, we won't know how many dog not barking incidents there have been over the past 3 years that have been addressed quietly and effectively. And this one slipped through the cracks and that's the issue, is how did this one slip through the cracks? What was it about whatever was the proactive techniques the government was using meant that this one slipped through the cracks? And I know everything like this has to be measured against how does this interfere with the rights of all citizens to, you know, uh, have freedom of expression, have freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and so on. And even though Australia does not have a charter, I know they've got strong, protections of those rights, and I'm sure there's a balancing going on whenever you talk about this. We could be in a police state, and that would mean there would be none of these incidents. But as we talked about earlier, that would mean there'd be not just a policeman on every street corner, there'd be like a soldier on every street corner. And you do see that in some jurisdictions. And that's clearly because there is such a high likelihood of something happening that they have to have that visible presence. But at any rate, I guess we will not know until the commission the degree that that sort of proactive preventative work is going on, pursuant to what laws, whether or not the balance is correct in terms of liberties versus order, law and order, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that's, it's an interesting way to put it. And I think it's a good way to put it, Carnahan, that, how did this one slip through the cracks? Because obviously the police were doing their job. They had their fingers on these particular actors. And it's a question of why these ones did get through and the other ones haven't. And as you said, when you catch, when the police are doing this proactively and, weeding these things out and preventing these incidents, they're non-events by definition.
Yeah, yeah,
And, I think it's in part, as you said, to keep the population calm, and so they're not needlessly unsettled. And I think it's also to, um, discourage copycat type
Yeah.
actors as well. So I think that's the case. What I find disturbing in this is the ramp up of attacks and threats of violence against the prime minister. And this
Ah,
is coming out of the radical right. So I think, um, I actually think that it's, part of a broader move against institutions of government in the Western world, where, excuse me, actors on the far left and on the far right. I think that distinction, left and right, is no longer meaningful. I think it's a question of institutionalists against individualists, or anarchists, or libertarians, however, whatever political pot they want to put themselves into. So the ramp up of violent threats has actually gone against the politicians, and particularly the government in power.
what is the wrath being directed specifically at the prime minister? What is the kind of uh, the stated explanation for why that man must go, and must go in a rain of bullets? Like what is it that they're saying that he's done that's so objectionable?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just invented stuff, uh, invented by the opposition, and in the opposition are these, are some of these radical right people. I know you have them in Canada as well.
Oh, sure,
So,
they're everywhere.
but yes, exactly. And this is just, another reason for them to lock and load. Uh, and their explanation, or supposed explanation, is a failure to respond by calling a royal commission quickly enough. The massacre was on the 14th. On the 15th, this it should have happened on the 15th rather than early January.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
it's a mix of, people just, mudslinging and making hay while they can, and really, vitriolic politics trying to exploit a tragedy, which interestingly the media got right and pointed out on both sides of politics, that the politicization of this tragedy was inappropriate, and the Australian population as a whole, wouldn't stand for it.
Well, that's nice. That's nice that in Australia, and that's going to be a topic, I think, for one of our future discussions, which is on the distinctive Australian approach to, for example, social media, and so on. I think we'll get an opportunity to dip more into that. But I'm pleased to hear that the sort of the quote unquote mainstream press is still has sort of sufficient anchor in Australia that they can take reasonable positions and not be overwhelmed by extreme, Fox News type stuff on the right, and maybe the equivalent on the left, as the case might be.
Yeah, 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 yeah. We continue to be a lucky country.
Well, yeah, I mean, but we're in this whether we're talking about Australia or Canada or really anywhere in the world now, everything is at a much more fragile state
Mhm.
than ever before. And so the question really is, these sorts of incidents are um, stress tests. They're stress
Very
tests
much.
on how, and this is where the concept of sustainable governance comes in the sense of it's what governments do, but it's also what the private sector does, and that's, for example, the mainstream press and other press, and then how civil society reacts and responds, not only reacting, responding, but what they do proactively to decrease these sorts of events from happening in the first place. And what you're saying, I'm taking that to mean that this aspect of the private sector has responded in a responsible way in this particular situation, and that has sort of carried the day, and the more extreme positions are essentially being tamped down by popular opinion that's not going along with extreme positions.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's correct. And so where you look at sort of the way emergency services are set up here, the coordinated government response, and there is still an ability for governance rather than just a response to opinion polls that are put out by radical actors, either internal to the country or external.
Right.
So, I think that's fortunate. But as you say, I think this is kind of a phenomenon, a broad efforts at destabilization in Western democracies.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll certainly be seeing more of this type of stuff around the globe, whether, regardless of how it's characterized, whether it's, or set up by extremism of Islam or extremism of the radical right or extremism of the radical left. And I mean, you can from that perspective, you could look at, excuse me, Trump's kidnapping of the Venezuelan uh, president, you know, as a radical right attack on a radical left.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that certainly is what I think we both had in mind when we were talking about the kind of the backdrop is this escalation of instability and continued poking and prodding to see how everyone reacts to it. And obviously, the United States is completely within the center of the target here. This is where it's happening on a day-to-day basis right now, and but it has a kind of a contagion effect
Mm.
everywhere else in the world. And so what happens there tends to have reverberations, both institutional reverberations and reverberations from civil society and the private sector. And I view anything that's happening in Australia is relevant to what's happening in Canada. It's relevant to what's happening in United States. In other Western democracies, and indeed, even in other parts of the world. We are all interconnected here. And every country is a social experiment in terms of exactly how it is set up, exactly how the laws work, exactly how they're enforced,
Mm.
the role of culture and the role of other entities in society. We're all engaging in a way social experiments, but we are
Mhm.
also part of a global village. And in that sense, what happens on the next block could be happening on your block tomorrow, because it gets ammunition. It gets oxygen. That would be the more correct word. It gets oxygen from what happened there, and you see, uh, you know. Uh, for example, President Trump commenting on Bolsonaro in Brazil, and he should go free and all that sort of thing. So you're having a direct effect or the indirect effect, which is it's okay to overturn an election or to deny the results of an election. So if it's okay for you there, then I guess it's okay for us to do the same thing here, type of thing. So I for one, I'm interested. This is one of the reasons why you and I are talking here today is because I think we can all learn. We're we're all works in progress. Each country is a work in progress,
Yeah.
and I don't think any particular country has got it right. My heart goes out to any country on any particular day that happens to be going through a particularly, alarming version of the issue. But we're all in this together, and we can
Mm.
all learn from each other, or we can all actually goad ourselves into more and more extreme positions. So the Australian position, therefore, to me at any rate, and this is why we're talking here today, in my opinion, it's to say, what can we learn? What can we learn from the Australian situation that potentially could be valuable, whether in Canada or in other countries? What more can the private sector do? What more can civil society do? What more can the government do? Uh, that's essentially, I think, the line of inquiry in all of your work, and it's the line of inquiry in my work and many other academics such as ourselves. We're coming at this from the angle of how can we help?
Yeah.
What sorts of insights can we get, and do those insights travel well, or do they only work within the distinctive context of the country where it initially came up?
So I think where that comes, where that, the fundamental question in the legal system is the nature of rights and the rights that are in contest here. And so you've got, the freedom of speech, which is a fundamental right recognized in the international instruments, and how that's domesticated, put into the municipal systems. Um, the uh, there's to me, there's sort of two bits to that. There's how that right, the freedom of expression, fits within a legal system and how it's implemented politically. So, in a legal system, as you're well aware, and I'm always very conscious, Carnahan, of speaking to you as a noted legal expert. We think about law as an abstract system. Rights are rights don't exist because God gave them, whether it's Vishnu, the Christian God, or Muhammad or
Come
anyone
on.
else.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So rights are constructed by governments, not by libertarians. They're constructed by governments, and they're agreed upon, um, and form the law. In that type of a system, rights are prioritized or subordinated depending on context and the specific legal frameworks in question. How those are dealt with outside of the legal system, in other words, how they're implemented and applied either in practice or by radical groups, then becomes different. So we see extremists shouting about cancel culture and their rights for freedom of expression, again, on both sides of politics. Um, the the reality is, as these are human rights created by humans, it's up to humans to determine, how much priority, how much authority or power they have. So as going back to the famous U.S. Supreme Court case that there's a limit on the right to expression. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. The these rights to expression, where there are limitations on the right to freedom of expression in a crowded society, and it's crowded with different views, different types of people, different interests, different ideologies. So restrictions on freedom of expression are, in my view, well, from a legal point of view, it's the same as restrictions to which side of the road you're going to drive on.
Mm.
You're not living in some absolute made up world where that occurs. So to me, I don't have, excuse me, any particular issue with restrictions on freedom of speech. Where the Australian approach to that is it's the freedom of political expression. So it's not an absolute freedom where, I can say anything I want, anytime I want to anyone. And in fairness, as I've just indicated, in some of the more fundamentalist, I suppose you could call them, versions of that in the US, it's recognized not to be an absolute right either. To the
Right.
extent, if you look at HLA Hart's thinking on that, on his cute little essay on natural rights,
Mm.
very, very nice short piece. He says, to the extent there might be any natural right at all, it's a natural right to life. Um, so the value or the importance of freedom of expression really comes out of the fourth idea of the fourth estate, where you have a media that's free to criticize a government. And
Right.
I think that's critical for effective governance. If the government is to be responsible for the people need to know what's going on. And some informed critique, widely publicized, is critical to effective governance. So the Australian position on freedom of expression is freedom of political communication. So there's no issue there um, where people are hateful of other Australians. Um, well, sorry, there's no reason that you can't legislate against that. It's, an, it's not an infringement of a right. It's because an infringement of a right presumes there's a pre-existing right to be infringed. It's so completely within the scope of law to adjust and modify and reform rights as appropriate to the social context.
Yeah, and there's underneath the sort of the norm, the basic norm of freedom of political communication or expression,
Mhm.
there is quite an elaborate and distinctive regulatory apparatus in place. For example, laws concerning lobbying, laws concerning the amount of money that can be spent, and so on. And different countries have adopted different approaches to that. And but to me, I view those as being regulatory apparatus underneath the kind of the rather simple statement about, yes, we have in this country freedom of political communication as long as it is not hate. But if you can influence electoral results because you have an incredible amount of wealth and you have paid for, the campaign of this person or that person, if you do not have to register as a lobbyist and so on and so forth, what you can do is you can distort the conversations, the normative conversations taking place in any jurisdiction. So a rather simple, a seemingly simple idea such as freedom of communication or freedom of expression becomes more operationalized when you start to consider and just exactly what can, for example, businesses do. Do they can they can they expend as much money as they want for any particular candidate? Do they have to register as lobbyists? And so on and so forth, right? Can they indirectly do things? Is it okay if I give you a gold-plated plane, but I give that to you to your wife rather than you? Like all that sort of stuff, right? So things start to get a lot more distinctive once you look at that underlying sort of regulatory structure, because something that seems very clean and simple, once you unpack it and look at those aspects, it can really help explain why things are the way they are in your
I
particular
think,
jurisdiction.
yeah, I think that's right. That like I sort of see two sides or two aspects of these problems, as you said, put it nicely, the regulatory implementation of these, broad or fundamental legal principles. And you've got the overt corruption of buying somebody a gold-plated plane or toilet or whatever may catch somebody's fancy. And the problem with lobbyists, and
Mhm.
it's a corruption of democracy there. It's a corruption of what ought to be democratic access to politicians. It becomes pay-to-play access for wealthy donors, um, who are putting in millions in order, and they're making great money because they're getting billions back. So I think I think that this is where the U.S. Supreme Court's gone off the rails, looking at freedom of expression to include commercial expression, and the question of lobbyists, and the failure of the political system either to ban it outright or at least be fully transparent, I think is a problem, and that it reduces confidence in governance and government systems. I think that the other aspect that to me is at least as worrying is the social media element, where social media operators, as massive business organizations connecting everybody on the planet one way or another, or pretty much everybody on the planet one way or the other, their algorithms are not uh, they're not set for any public purpose. They're set for essentially inflaming people. Angertainment, I think, is the term,
Mhm.
um, where there's not any sense of let's build a better community, or let's have a democratic discussion, or let's have a balanced discussion. It's what views are more extreme to get more clicks and make us more money. And so they're busy stoking extremism for private profit. And I think that that's really, fundamentally antisocial. And I think it's antisocial on a massive scale, really unimaginable even 20 years ago. And I think that this is part of what's undermining the institutions of government that allow us to have the society we have. And they're happy to stoke extremism from Islamists, from Russian interference, from radical right parties. You look at Elon Musk interfering with democratic politics in Western Europe and elsewhere in the world. And these are algorithms under the control of tech oligarchs who have no interest in running businesses for sustainability or on sustainability principles, either social or environmental sustainability principles, or indeed at all aligned with United Nations general principles. So I think that that's a massive problem. And, I think that I think that we're still far, far, far away from figuring out how to deal with that. Although
I think
actually,
you're right.
You and I had a chat a couple of years ago where you had some really interesting ideas of how social media might work, to help
Responsible
regulate,
communication. Yeah, yeah,
responsible social media.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
mhm.
Well, yeah, that I couldn't agree with you more about how we are very far away. The world is very far away from really coming to grips with how social media uh, changes things, changes the entire nature of democracy, the nature of conversations. It can, as you say, the algorithms can tend to lead people into more and more extreme positions. That's one aspect. Another aspect is just through a very slight thing like an email that goes out or a text message that goes out from a particular social media platform on the day of an election that's just framed in terms of we encourage everybody to go to the polls today and make sure you ensure that fill in the blanks. Some whatever it is they say there can basically mean the difference between a 51% for this party or that party. If it's just framed in terms of
Mhm.
and make sure that our rights that we continue to have our first, second, and third rights, fully upheld. It just says that, which may seem like an innocent statement, but that could be the difference between and essentially that power is now in the hands of private actors.
Correct.
So that's
Correct.
why, and this is probably a great way for us to end things off. That's why you and I are going to have another discussion on, I think, the very distinctive approach that Australia is taking to social media, both respect to children and also with respect to just generally the news, the mainstream news, and how that interacts with social media. So we'll leave that for our next discussion because that one I do think is wide open as to how do we do this? How do we wrestle this to the ground? Because clearly it's not working. And I would argue that's the backdrop to incidents like Bondi Beach happening is
Mm,
a kind of everybody is on edge and everybody's being pushed to a
mm,
polarized position left and right. And social media is playing around the world. It's playing a critical role in that polarization exercise. So how do we address it? It's a new technology. It's one where the full implications are only now becoming available. And then we can add in AI on top of that, which is going to be
yeah.
even more complicated. But um, this is why you and I are talking, because Australia is wrestling with these issues in its unique way and is having its unique tragedies, unfortunately, as
Yeah.
are we in Canada, as is the United States, France, etc. You name the country.
Yeah.
We're all wrestling with this. I just think that what we need to do is share our insights as we all grope towards potentially a better solution, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Super. I think you're right, Carnahan. I'm looking forward to that chat.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of Toronto Metropolitan University in general, and also specifically the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, I'd like to just thank you again for taking the time, Ben, and very much looking forward to our next discussion.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Carnahan.
All the best.
All the best.